sure weak people acting strong. So I look outside to see the green. Do you dream of drinking from the grail, that the truth is held within a tale, and Arthur sleeps now, ready to return? Do you know that Jack lives in the green, that things are new?
Happy Thursday, everyone. This is Natalie, and you are watching Witches of the Moon. This is week 8 of season 4, and this week we are discussing our personal path. A lot of people have requested this topic. It was one that was very popular the last time that we did something very similar to this, and so but I don't like to rehash what I've already talked about. I did do a video on my personal channel about 2 years ago about my personal path and how I came to that path. So I would like to kind of make this a continuation of that and talk about my path itself, not so much how I came to my path or what influenced me to go on this path, but instead what I have learned in the time since I have begun full time on this journey. I do not like labels. I find labels very restricting, and there are many things about many different paths. I like to read, I like to learn, I like to learn about different cultures and different people, I like to learn different languages, and so for me, I like to incorporate aspects of various paths that I find appealing to myself, that I think might benefit me in a spiritual manner. And what I mean by that is I follow a typically Celtic path. I'm very interested in the Druidic path. It speaks to me and always has my entire life because, I guess because of my roots. I have Irish and Scottish roots. I also have French roots, which the Celts spread into France and Gaul in that area. So I don't know if it's because of my background or if it's because it's just something that is important to me, but it has always appealed to me. I love nature, I love trees, I like to be around trees, probably a little bit more than people. And so following on my reading and my studying on that path, that's kind of the way that my practice tends to go. I do work with the Morrigan, and I also work with Cernunnos as my god. So, but they're not the only ones that I utilize. Those are not the only aspects of the Lord and Lady that I utilize. And what I mean by that is I have always also had an avid interest in ancient Egyptian culture. I've always been very drawn to the Egyptian pantheon and have studied it avidly since I was in 3rd grade. So for me, I also will utilize some of the Egyptian pantheon in certain workings that I'm doing. And I may call them more than one. I may combine the two and work with that. So I can't say that I'm strictly Celtic in my path, because I also like to incorporate things that are perhaps more Eastern in their nature. I do a lot of meditating, which is not strictly Druidic, although I understand that the Druids did do some meditation, or a form of meditation. I think that my meditation techniques and that sort of thing tend to go more towards the Eastern tradition. For example, I do a lot of chakra clearing meditations, and chakra is not anything that's Celtic in nature. It's more, I believe, Indian or Hindu or Buddhist in nature, and so I tend to have a lot of respect for that. To me, it makes sense to my logical mind. So things that I find make sense to me logically, spiritually, that I connect with, I'll incorporate into my path. So I'm not strictly this or that. And I find labels like that very restricting. So when somebody asks me, well, what are you? Or, what do you practice? What do you believe? It's difficult for me to kind of talk about it. And it's also difficult for me to talk about it because it's kind of personal to me. I feel that each person's path is personal, and I try not to be judgmental about other people's paths. We have to make judgments about things, obviously. So, I might deem that, okay, I see where you might go along that line of thinking, but I don't connect with that, so I'm not going to take it. That's a judgment. I try not to say, well, that's not right, or you're wrong about that, or because I don't know. The God and Goddess speak to each of us in their own way, and unless you're doing something that's physically harming someone else or keeping someone else from walking their path, then I'm not going to make a statement like that to you. That's one of the things that drew me away from a Christian path, was that there were so many people that I met that had varying and disagreeing beliefs about what this scripture meant or that scripture meant, and each person was so judgmental about everybody else's interpretation to the point that they closed their mind and wouldn't even listen to where the other person was getting at, or they would argue back and forth, throwing scriptures right and left and right and left. And I admit I was involved in a lot of those arguments because I do like a good debate. I find debate very intellectually stimulating. So it's very difficult for me to talk about that, because for me it's very personal, and I don't like to argue with people over things, although I like debate. I like lively debate. I like discussion. I like, well, I understand where you think that, but this is why I believe what I believe. That's very different than saying, well, I understand why you believe that, but that's crap, or I don't believe it, or that's bullshit, or whatever. Those kinds of arguments I have a real problem with, and when you are talking about someone's spirituality, people tend to get very emotional about that, because like it or not, your religion is a part of how you live your life. It's almost impossible to separate one's religion or practice of the craft from their lifestyle. It all incorporates, and that's true with any faith path, actually. If that person is truly living that faith path, then it seeps into all aspects of their life, work, social, what have you. It's going to form who they associate themselves with, the kind of job that they may take, what kinds of charities they'll donate their money to, things like that. So it's very personal, but it does tend to shape who you are. I don't like labels also for the simple fact that a lot of people, and there's been a lot of debate about what is a witch. Well, I'm a witch. But my path isn't the same as any other witch that's there. I know witches that say witchcraft is not a religion, that you can be pagan and not be a witch. And that's definitely true. You can follow a pagan pantheon and a pagan path and not be a practitioner of the craft. I know that my co-host Nimbus River is one of those that feels that way. He thinks witchcraft is not a religion, but I would argue in a way that it is, not so much that you are worshiping a specific deity or worshiping in a specific way, but to me religion is more than just a faith base. It is a lifestyle. Your religion dictates how you live your life, and the craft dictates how I live mine. What I do with my spare time, what I study, what I read, who I associate myself with, who I talk to, activities I draw fulfillment from, such as making these videos for you guys. And I do have to apologize, I look like hammered shit today, and I am so sorry. It's the end of the day. It's been a very long week already. It's only Monday, but hey, I'm recording this on Monday because I don't think I'm going to have time the rest of the week to get to it. So I just want to apologize about that. But again, to me, it's your spiritual path is your religion. It may not necessarily be a religion in terms of an organized faith, but it's still your spirituality and it's still your religion. And for me, that the craft is part of that. I practice daily, and I draw fulfillment from that. So, in terms of what I choose to study and what draws me down a specific part of my path, that varies a lot too, because I might take, like I said, I have a very big interest in Druidism. I'm actually looking at becoming a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids. It's a 3-year course of study. It's $30 a month, roughly. If you do it by PayPal, you can pay it up front, your membership dues. But they send you monthly lessons to study on the path of Druidism. And your first year Bard is the year in which you are learning to kind of find the creativity, the creative spark within you, perhaps as a bard, which is a musician or a storyteller, which I love to tell stories. I like to talk to people. I like to teach. I love music. It's very important to me. I write poetry. I do a lot of writing. I've written several short stories and books, things I've never published, but someday I would like to maybe do so. But that is part of that creative spark of the divine. It's that need to create, whether it's, in an artistic form or otherwise. Some people sculpture, some people sing, some people play music, some people can't craft very well. That's all a part of that spark. And so that first year of practice in that is designed towards that. And then you go into the obates and full druidism. So, one is, I believe, an understanding of learning the things that kind of go along with connecting with nature and preserving the ideals, and then the very last part would be considered like your priesthood, where you are a passer on, a teacher of that faith, and so forth, I believe. So I'm a little confused on that. But that's why I want to study that path. It's something I would like to know more about. And I find that the people I've met that are part of the order are very stimulating. So my interest kind of lies that way, and I'm kind of leaning that way towards my path right now. Other things that have caught my interest, thank you to Nimbus River, I have had some interest in some of the Native American traditions, which have always been appealing to me as well, and particularly the Cherokee, because my grandfather's mother, my great-grandmother, was a full-blood Cherokee, and she was, I didn't know her very well. She was already kind of old when I came along, and so I never got to know her, but it's my understanding that she stuck to her tribe beliefs quite stringently until her later years. And so that is something I would like to explore more, just because that's a part of my family and a part of my history. So thanks to Nimbus River, I have done a little more reading on Selu and some of the more traditional Native American views, which I've incorporated some of that into my practice as well. I also, like I said, I have a friend who's Buddhist. He's been Buddhist for years, and we have some interesting discussions about philosophy and belief and so forth, and I draw some from that. So I like to think that I learn a lot from talking to other people, and I love interaction in groups like on Facebook and stuff. I don't have a lot of free time to actually physically meet with people in my area. I know that there's a large pagan group in my area that meets quite frequently, and I get invited often to the meetings, but they're out in Paris, which is some distance from me here, or in Greenville, which is also some distance, so I don't always have the time or the gas or the money to drive out there to meet with those groups, and I would love to, but I find that Facebook kind of fills that gap for me. I get a chance to kind of read some discussions, and I may not always be able to respond, especially in a timely manner, because sometimes I'm catching it between clients, and I may not have time to type out what I consider an appropriate response. But I learn a lot from the other responses and things that I see. So my path kind of goes in a winding sort of fashion. For me, I am a witch, and that's the basic, but I really hate labels, because and what label I give myself, I have to say, varies a lot depending on the circumstances too, because there are some people that if you tell them I'm a witch, they totally freak out on you, or they start preaching at you, which I really can't stand. If somebody wants to understand my path and they want to ask me questions about it, I have no problem with answering questions. But as a rule, I generally don't like to advertise. Like, I don't tell my clients, although a few of them know, I don't tell my clients, yeah, I'm a witch, I don't advertise that openly. A couple of my neighbors know it, but I mean, I have things that I do. I have my pentacles around the house, and I have my outdoors traditions that I do. I grow my monkshood. I have my rosemary growing in my garden. I have my lavender. I listen to my Dave the Bard music all the time, so it's not like, people, if they really took a good look, wouldn't go, But at the same time, it's just something that I don't feel is really anybody else's business per se. I like sharing in this format because I get feedback from you guys, and that helps to shape my path as well, because again, I'm all about dialogue. I think we're all kind of interconnected, and I believe that humanity and the world as a whole is a system. When you drop a rock in a pond, it ripples out, and then it ripples back in, but that affects all aspects of the pond. It eventually makes its way all the way out, and I feel that way about us and our interactions with each other, and so I enjoy being able to do this because I get ripples back from you guys, and it helps me to grow as a human being and as a person, and so that is so very vital and important to me. Plus, I like to teach. I like to pass my knowledge on to others, what I've learned and what's affected me, and I like to share that kind of experience with you guys very, very much. That's one of the reasons that I'm part of this channel. I was so excited to be a part of it because I gained so much from this channel when well, it's funny because I've always been a witch. My whole life I've been a witch. I've always been clairvoyant. I've always had skills and abilities that others didn't have. My mother was always kind of wigged out by the fact that I would know when something was going to happen. I always seem to know quite when somebody needs to hear from me or somebody needs particularly an uplifting kind of phrase to them. I'll just send them a little message, hey, I love you. I want you to know I'm thinking about you and that you're loved. And I get feedback all the time from people going, wow, I don't know how you knew, but it couldn't have come at a better time. Crazy stuff like that. And I've been that way my whole life. I've always had prophetic dreams, and I can remember them. I can remember my dreams very, very well, usually for days and hours after they happen. I don't even have to journal them. So it's things that like that. So I've always known. But I grew up in a very staunch Christian household, and it was never anything where you were free to express your own opinions and ideals. You believed what my mother believed, as long as you lived in her house. And then after I got married, my husband was Catholic, and I loved my mother-in-law and adored her very, very much. She passed away several years ago, and that's been very hard for me because she was always very good and kind to me. She was indeed a saint. If anybody on this planet can be a saint, she was one. Not that she wasn't human and without her faults and mistakes too, but really she was one of those people that truly tried to live what she believed, even staying single until the day she died after my father-in-law dumped her in a small town. So she was very loyal to her beliefs, and one of the few people I've met in the Christian faith that have really lived what they preached, as far as I could see. And out of respect for her, I think, more than anything else, being afraid of what would Maria say, or how would Maria feel, because being staunch Catholic, obviously witchcraft is just not a thing, but it was not anything I really connected with. Although I really liked being Catholic in some ways, there were things about it that I didn't connect with that were just basic to Christianity that I didn't get. I didn't like the disparage between the men and women, and the subject yourself. That's not going to happen. I'm sorry, that's just not going to happen. As my husband has learned over the years, that's just not going to happen. So to me, it always seemed lopsided, and I was very drawn to the balance of the pagan faith, that male and female are required, and indeed, if you need male and female to have life, how can you have a god without a goddess? How can you have creation without masculine and feminine energy if you're having a male and female? So that was one of those things that never made sense to me. So that was one of the things that drew me initially to fully walking on this path, I guess is the best way to say it. It's been a winding path getting here, but I consider it a growth because it was always kind of there in the back of my mind and in the back of my heart and soul. I just didn't feel free to really fully explore it and express it, which I now am doing, because when I hit my 40s, I realized I can't continue to live my life for my mother or my mother-in-law or even my husband or my kids. My kids are growing up, they're getting out of the house. They have their lives to live, and I don't want to oppress them the way I felt oppressed, religiously speaking. They have to find the path to divinity that works for them, and I can't be judgmental of that, regardless of which path they choose, any more than I would expect them to be judgmental of me. And so I try to take a very neutral stand, and I don't like to discuss my faith or my religion, even amongst my family, because I get a lot of hot and cold, My one daughter kind of seems to think it's a little ridiculous. My other daughter just totally ignores it. My oldest daughter is probably the most understanding, and will ask me questions about it. But, my husband kind of up and down in his support as well. I would say for the most part he's been pretty supportive of it. But there are times when, especially when I was first starting out on the, openly on the path, he was not always very supportive. I think he's come to understand that it's not what he was always taught as a cradle Catholic that this path really means. And I think that that's part of the problem, is after 2,000 some odd years of brainwashing, and probably more than that if you want to consider the Judaism, prior to the onset of Christianity, because Judaism has been around for probably about 1,000 years prior to Christianity. You've got people that are just dead set against it, and so you have to be very cautious, I think. And I know that a lot of people say the first rule of Witch Club is don't talk about Witch Club, but I think also those that are not willing to share their knowledge and educate people around them run the risk of stamping out their own selves. So, needless to say, that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this channel. So that gives you a little bit of information about my path. It's very winding and it's very eclectic in nature, I think. I love to read and I love to study. Those are just some of my books. I'm always acquiring new books. I'm always hitting the used bookstore. I'm always scoping out what my friends have to trade or sell. I actually prefer to purchase straight out rather than to trade, simply because there might be something in one of those books I want to refer back to at some point. Or I will often reread those books, and I always learn something new, something I either forgot or didn't absorb the first time I read it. So I don't like to trade books, because to me a book is a treasure. Knowledge is treasure, whether it's mine or somebody else's. As long as I've read it and I've acquired it, it then becomes my knowledge, and then I can then share that. So I believe a lot in study, and find what connects with you, and that's the path that I typically walk down. I know that my path is probably completely 100% unique to me, and it varies from day to day, because I'll keep reading, and I'll keep growing, and I'll keep learning, and that's all that I can hope I help you all do as well, and I apologize for my voice. But essentially, that's my path. It's ever-changing, ever-winding, ever-evolving, based on my own knowledge and growth, my interactions with others, my own research, and my own revelations from the Lord and Lady through meditation and study. So I hope that was a little interesting to you guys. I always like to think that I'm imparting some sort of idea or knowledge that you may not have heard elsewhere, and I try not to repeat everything everybody else has said. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful week, and many blessings on your personal journey.